Productive Pastor 45. What guitar playing taught me about systems. What's going on, friends? Welcome back, Productive Pastor, episode 45. And this is a little weirder of an episode. I think the best way to describe it is an audio essay. Maybe that's what I'm going to go with. But people always ask a lot of questions about systems, and I've seen people try to develop systems and struggle with it. They struggle with the point of implementation, from when like one person does it to a team, or when one person develops a system and brings it out to a church or a leadership group, that sort of thing. And so many of the conversations I've had with people about systems, they really go from the fact of it might make 10,000% sense to the person who built it, but the struggle point is passing that system on. And a lot of the language I think that's helpful is this idea of minimum viable product. That's a business word that you see people talk about in this idea of what is the smallest way something can make the biggest impact. And over the last few months, I've been learning a lot about this idea and thinking about systems. And it came out when I realized that there was something going on with me picking back up the guitar. And I realized something was going on. So I wrote this out as an essay, and I was like, this doesn't feel like it should be written anywhere. And I realized, let's just go for the audio essay here on Productive Pastor and talk through this. But friends, this is Action Land. This is a lot of Action Land stuff here. In fact, I think it's a kind of a good intersection of the Action Land theory land. But if you've ever struggled with systems or wanting to develop systems, what I'll tell you is you might be making it more complicated. And what if that is the issue? So let's talk about systems and how learning guitar riffs helped me out with it. So I've been playing guitar since I was 11. And all through adolescence, I played constantly. I would like to say I was decently good. I thought I'd be doing music my entire whole life. And in adulthood, my interest in music has ebbed and flowed over the last 20 years or so. And I'll be honest with you, the last 10 years, it has ebbed. It's ebbed pretty hard. And what I realized was, in a lot of ways, was not having people to play with just made it to where I was uninterested in music and I wasn't really challenging myself. But for the last year, I've really tried to throw myself back into it. I set some goals, though, because I wanted to learn how to do some things I never really have learned. I've never been a lead player. I love chords, riffs, the whole nine yards. I'll tell people that I can do the Tom Petty rhythm guitar, no problem at all. But I've never had the chops, really, to feel comfortable soloing, playing lead guitar. And if I'm in a room by myself, I'm not scared. I have some fun. I learned those things. And so I decided, there's some great online tools out there, and let me try to get into it. But I was frustrated 10 times again because I was jumping in too deep of a pool than I was able to swim in. And so in my interneting around, I found something really interesting, and this is what made me start thinking about systems and about minimum viable product and all of that sort of thing. Is this: there's this style of guitar teaching video. You see it on YouTube and other social media places, but it's called the 5 levels. And what it does is it takes a song that might be complicated, and it shows you 5 levels of playing the song, from the very most basic it is to the most complex. And honestly, sometimes the complexity is even more complicated than what's found on the record. But what I realized this genius is it actually progresses you towards learning the whole song. So rather than you can kind of play one uncomplicated bit, but the complicated bit makes it impossible, and you just get frustrated because you're never feeling competent at the whole thing. And so rather than doing what I did when I was a teenager, and it's what I've done, honestly, the last couple of years where it gets me frustrated, what this method does is it goes through the very basics of the whole song all the way through. And when you have that down, then you go up to the next level, you gain comfortability with it, you gain knowledge, you have that down, and then you go up again. The teenager method is go straight to the complex, struggle with it, get bored, get frustrated, and then give up on the whole thing. But where this 5 levels method makes sense is you were always building the necessary skills for the next step and enjoying the present moment in a way that keeps you engaged in the process. And I cannot tell you how many times I've either seen, I've worked with, or I've been at churches that have a very similar thing towards trying to understand some part of their ministry where they go into it just full tilt boogie. It becomes complicated and clunky and they quit doing the whole thing. You need to look at what is the first layer, second layer, that sort of thing. So all of this helps us in our idea of struggling with systems, developing systems, whether it's personally with us or whether it's in teams. So think about this. How many times have you created something, some sort of system, and you find it failing in the first few weeks because it's just too much to keep up with? And I know also I have burned out people on the idea of systems early on because what was created was simply too complicated for them. I handed them something I had been doing for 6 months, and I had refined like crazy, and it made 100% sense to me, but it just overwhelmed the other person. Or maybe things just get you get too enthusiastic and you bite off more than you can chew. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about 5 stages of system design and how we can stair-step our understanding of systems as a whole, but also what does it mean to create a new system that is sustainable. Okay, so 5 layers of this, and this is actually pretty simple. This will be a pretty quick conversation. So the first layer is this, the most basic. This is you learn the root notes to the song. You might throw some chords in there, okay? The what and the why. So think about it this way. What is the problem? What is the task? Why is this necessary? Is this something that's going to help us move forward? Is this going to help us? That's something that's going to stop the bleeding? All of those sorts of things. The first step in systems design is really just identifying what you need to do. Going back and asking questions in order to understand the friction points that are involved. And I'll be honest, like just this morning, I was working on a program and a product for a ministry I'm working with, and I became a little bit convicted. It's like, okay, Chad, this is getting a little businessy, a little bit more businessy than you were comfortable with. Before I realized the discernment pathway that goes on as part of this is where you begin to see where is God moving, where God might be calling you to do, how you might uniquely be responding to this. So, we did the entire mini series on technical versus adaptive challenges and change, to where we really think, how do we intersect with the agency God has given us in this moment? So this first stage, and that's the thing, is this needs to be done with not just you, but with more people, is this idea of just clearly identifying what is going on, what is this problem, why is this necessary, and just trying to understand the reason that this system needs to exist. The teenager guitar version of this is just handing somebody an idea you printed off the internet and say, hey, this is going to fix everything, make it happen. Okay? So you see the healthy, helpful way and the unhealthy teenager way. The second thing is this. This is the second stage. Think about, when does this need to happen? Remember, systems are about repetition. Systems are about patterns. They're about rhythms, all of these sorts of things. The second layer is identifying, okay, this is a healthy thing. This is a helpful thing. But when and where does this rhythm go? Are there daily components? Are there weekly components? Are there a monthly component? Or might be asking yourself your question, how often does this system need to be run? What is triggering this system? Is this system triggered by an action that somebody specifically can make? And so that second layer of thinking through systems is, okay, when does this need to happen? How does the calendar play into effect with this? And here, this is the layer, this is the big layer, y'all. This is the layer where you need to have people involved for absolute sure, because if this gets done by you in isolation and it's a system that somebody else is going to have to work inside of and manage, this is where if you just hand them something, what you're saying is, this is more important than the rhythms and the schedule that you already have built up. And while it might seem simple to you, it could possibly be absolutely overwhelming to someone else. I say all of this because where systems become really, really necessary is when ministry gets complex enough to need more people, and sometimes when ministry is outpacing the staffing resources you have. That might be an indicator of when a system needs to be put in place, or, hey, we have a level of, our capability cannot rise towards this being healthy in an unintentional way. We've got to make this intentional. But systems always involve other people. So I'm beating that horse to death. But at this point in time, especially when it involves scheduling, make sure other people are there thinking through this with you. So schedule 3, what are the basic practices? We're still in quarter 1 of the new year, and there could be several things that you want to develop and you want to do. This stage 3 is where we kind of get into the mud a little bit and start talking about this. So let's play this game. So let's play that one of your goals for 2023 is you want to start a sermon podcast for your church. Let's pretend this is happening, and let's talk about what that basic idea looks like. Now, if you called me and contacted me and grabbed a couple of coaching sessions to talk about best podcast practices, and you have absolutely no audio experience with audio editing or these sorts of things, and you came to me with like this really well-produced, well-polished sermon podcast that you want to try to copy, I could give you a system for what that would look like. And I know how to do that, but you don't know how to do that. And I promise you would absolutely become overwhelmed. But what's the minimum viable product that gives a maximum impact? Okay, remember, we're thinking about someone wanting to start a sermon podcast. I did an emailed newsletter about how to do this in a really easy way. I'm going to link to that in the show notes if just this whole topic of conversation is interesting to you. But this, if you're doing this from scratch without a media department, I would do what I recommended in that email. I would get a simple lapel microphone that goes on your person. Rode makes one, DJI makes one. They're little, they're unobtrusive, and they're USB-C powered. It's the most idiot-proof microphone I know about. You could probably do this podcast without editing. The microphone handles all the digital stuff. You literally turn it on when you start your sermon, and you turn it off when you stop your sermon. The only task part of the system that you would have to do would be, I need to upload this file on Monday before noon. Now, here's the deal. Just that simple thing, like the whole system is buy the microphone, turn the microphone on when you start preaching, turn it off when you stop preaching. Grab the file, upload it to Anchor, which is the simplest thing out there, and make sure you do it Monday morning before noon. Here's the thing. That's a really simple, minimum viable product that gives a really big impact. That's like the level 1 of what the system could look like. And honestly, just this first iteration of the system, the simplest part of any system, I think, is the simplest, like square one. This is what this looks like in a minimum way that causes the most impact. That's going to be your biggest impact. And if something if it's something that doesn't hit an impact until the system is more complicated and complex, what I'll tell you is you might actually be talking about 2 or 3 different needs that one system is trying to meet. Okay, the work that you do to think about what is happening and when does this happen, and then only once you understand what and when do you define these basic practices, this is the level where people begin to see a benefit to systems thinking. This is the thing that makes them think, wow, this isn't that much extra work at all, and it is absolutely and totally worth it. And that's what I'm going to stress. The first iteration of this system should be giving you the biggest impact. This is where I will get myself in trouble. And if I talk about strength finders, like my maximizer, some other stuff, like I love to nitpick and like push for tiny little incremental gains. But what's so funny is, just the basic level of what a system like this has done, it's going to get you to like 85%. And then what you're going to be doing is you're going to be nitpicking half percentage points of better at this point in time. So really, That third level, once you have clarity through your what's and your wins, that third level is what is the most absolute basic that this can be. Now, level 4, this is where you start getting to from amateur to professional here. And the problem is this is where a lot of people try to start. They want to start at level 4. This is like the 14-year-old version of Chad, like trying to play the Freebird solo 2 months after he got his first electric guitar. You might be hitting some of the notes and you might be kind of in the right rhythm, but it's just clunky. Okay, but when you get to level 4 and you work your way up, you got the what, you've got the when, you've defined the basic practices, and you've run the system enough times to see how well it works. Now, here's the thing. If this is a daily system, you need to run it for a month. It needs to be run a few months for a weekly system, and it might be run 6 times for something that happens once a month. And do you see where this is? If it's not simple enough to do for those lengths of time in a way where you're not so impatient, you don't want to see immediate results, you've probably made your system too complicated. But keep to that schedule because system's repetition is what matters. And so you, at that point in time, you start finding the holes. You start asking questions, okay, where can things be expanded out a little bit in a direction that does provide more significant value or does provide bigger value? Do not obsess over things that make it 0.5% or 1% better. But once you've got like your sea legs underneath and you realize, okay, hey, this could make things like 10% better, that's where you start making some transitions and decisions. So to keep up with the podcast conversation, say you're 6 months in, so you have like 20-something episodes by that point in time, and you realize, hey, you know what? We're getting some pretty good traction with this, especially locally. Like, people in my church are using this. And so then you realize, okay, maybe it's time to put together some better show notes. Maybe we need to create some sort of a take-home for small groups or individuals. I've shared before in the past what we call the home sheet at a previous church of mine. You ask, okay, what could I do here or here? Or if you've got the audio editing chops, saying, okay, let's maybe work up a podcast intro and see what that looks like. And we can do the intro and then have a little bit of music and then have the sermon after it. You know, there's things you can do to expand this that would get you, 5 to 10% better. But this is the thing. When you add something into a system, you need to start back at square one and go through the same basic questions. You need to reset the counter on evaluation. And you also, because that's what it does, when you hit stage 4 and you realize, okay, we think something can be significantly better, go back to what? Go back to when? Go back to look and say, hey, is this going to take away from our basic practices? Those sorts of things. You don't want to add a bunch of unnecessary things at once either. The better rule is that the wider your system affects people, or the further away it is from just one person, the simpler it needs to be. So let's put it this way. Let's go back to the sermon podcast. Okay, hey, so phase 1, the most basic idea of it is pastor has the microphone. They turn it on when they start preaching. They turn it off when they stop preaching. They pull the file, upload it to Anchor. Boom, there's a sermon. So you get to the point where, hey, okay, I'm going to have somebody else on my staff upload it. And the pastor doesn't really do website stuff or communication stuff. And so, they'll create these show notes or they'll create this take-home, but somebody else uploads it, emails it out. You see, you get 3 people then involved inside of the system. That means there are 3 points of failure. So the more complicated it needs to be, or the more people are involved in it, the simpler it needs to be. Now, if we're talking about a personal system that is just for your own focus and your own workflow, adding a new item or new step isn't a big deal because you can realize quickly, yeah, this isn't working, this isn't providing value, I'm going to stop doing it. But if this is a system that's been implemented and the person who is running steps in this system isn't the one who is adding the step and sees the value in the step and is potentially leading the charge in creating the new step, you've created another point of failure, a place that it can fall down. Because any addition needs to be super simple and understood by the person that was responsible for the system, okay? That's where you are on that. Now, here's the final state of a system. This is the final, and it's going to seem kind of backwards because you feel like we should have done this at first, but no. Think of the idea of what a standard operating procedure is. Now, this is a businessy concept where someone has refined a system really, really well, and now it's completely lined out so it can be assigned and delegated, and you can save that system away because you've kept it simple, and now it's there for posterity, so it can always be assigned and passed on. And hopefully it can be reduced down to a level where certain things can be picked up really quickly by folks. In a lot of ways, I feel like this is if you're a part of a staff team especially, this is the pastor's role in some of this systems design stuff, is that you are there to refine things enough to get to an SOP. And then once it's at that SOP state, it can be run by volunteers or by staff. You know, think back to those cooking shows when people say, all right, knife's down. And then you put your stuff down and you raise your hands up. This stage 5 is when you're saying we are no longer tweaking on this. Like, it is done. We will respond to stuff if we need to change it to respond, but this system is done because it is creating the result that we needed this system to do. And this is hard for people. Like I said earlier, strengths. My maximizer is always looking for ways for things to get better. I am the king of obsessing over, half a percentage point of gain in things, but that's not healthy whatsoever at all. So think about the systems. Do this. Like this is an exercise. Think about the times that you've tried to maybe implement a system personally and implemented a system as part of a team in some way, and it didn't work. Now, did you maybe start off being way too complicated from the very beginning? Or potentially, did you design this entire thing by yourself and then hand it to somebody to accomplish? We don't want to be the 14-year-olds trying to play the Freebird solo. But if you follow the 5-step videos I've seen on YouTube, you can play Freebird one day, and you'll do it in a way that makes sense. So, different episode, audio essay, but about a topic that people always love to hear and think about. That's systems here in the local church. So, do me a favor. Come hang out with the Productive Pastor community. If you've liked this conversation, or if you have questions about systems or what that sort of thing looks like, I always love hosting this. I love hanging out with you all, and I will see you all back on the next episode.